Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Ho. H to the OV. I used to move snowflakes by the OZ. I guess even back then you can call me CEO of the ROC. Ho. Fresh out the frying pan into the fire. I be the music biz #1 supplier.
Da 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 da.
Beautiful voice.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Welcome. This is Two Bros, One Book. I'm Lloyd.
And I'm Will.
And we're two bros, and we get together every couple of weeks and we read one book. One book neither of us have read before. One book we don't discuss in advance. And we tell you about the book. We tell you whether we liked the book or didn't like the book, and what and whether we didn't, what we didn't like about it. Anything else, Will?
Well, it's just our kind of mini book club, I guess.
Yeah.
So we share our thoughts, take it or leave it. Let's see where we end up.
The Bro Book Club. We're using bro quite loosely, right? I mean, Will and I have worked in the tech business for a long time, so we're very familiar with bro culture. Although I would say neither of us are really bros. I don't know. Will, are you a bro?
I wouldn't call myself a bro.
No.
I kind of do it in. I hope we have no bro listeners, because I kind of do it in a bit of a kind of sarcastic sense.
That's okay. I think, someone told me on Twitter once that you don't know if you're a bro.
Okay, so it's kind of like you're elected by the people. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like having privilege. Like, you can't decide if you have it. Right? You just have
it's something you can't help.
Yeah, you just are.
Okay.
You just are. So if we're bros, post a comment in our web zone if we're bros or not.
All right.
And we'll send you a cookie.
We can only hope.
Yeah. So the book this week is Joseph Campbell's I was about to say The Hero's Journey. It's not called The Hero's Journey. It's called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. This is a kind of a classic of 20th century American lit crit, or British lit crit, I guess. Joseph Campbell's American, right?
I think he's American. Yeah.
Anglo-American. So, Will, why don't you tell us a little bit what this book is actually all about?
Sure. I'll try, and feel free to chime in, Lloyd. So I think it was published just after the war.
54, I think.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And Campbell kind of explores this theory of the monomyth, the idea that all myths across human culture share a fundamental structure. And this, as you said earlier, is what he kind of dubbed as the hero's journey, right?
Yeah, it's this kind of idea that there's this inherent. He had this notion. Campbell was interested in Freudian psychoanalysis,
yes.
and he
it kind of put me off, actually. Sorry.
Which is it's a bit strange, because he was really into Freud, but actually Freud, good to know. A difference with Freud is that Campbell suggests that these theories, these structures of stories, the idea of a single sort of inherent human structure of a story is not something that Freud probably would have signed up for. Freud was more about early life experience shaping the id and the ego and the superego. It was about life experience. So when he was talking about, the Oedipal complex, that's the idea of wanting to kill your father and marry your mother. That's a reenactment of a conflict, of a real emotional conflict that is supposed to occur when you're a baby, before you are consciously aware of the world.
Sure.
So it's not actually, Freud was never saying that's a structure in your brain that tells you kill your father, marry your mother. That's not what he was saying. Campbell, on the other hand, in order to make his theory work, and we'll talk later about why maybe that is sort of critical and possibly fatal to his theory, has to peddle the notion that stories across all cultures have the same building blocks because of the way human brains develop everywhere. right? So before we get too far into that, why don't we just talk about what does the book actually tell us? What is the hero's journey? Do you have it in front of you, or do you want me to narrate it?
You go for it.
So I actually used to teach this, and Will was actually subjected to one of my lectures on this at one time, a long time ago.
I was, yeah.
Having
A fond memory, a fond memory.
It's very useful. It's a very useful tool for understanding and for communicating how to tell effective stories. And we'll see why in a bit. But I have problems, and I would say as I've gotten older, I've gotten much less certitude about how well it actually works. So the idea is that there's a hero's journey that all great heroes of myth go through, and it's a cycle, it's a circle. So you start wherever you are, you have a call to adventure. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we can analogize this easily to, famously Star Wars. The first Star Wars was based on the monomyth, right? So it's literally patterned after this circle that Campbell designed. So you have the call to adventure. This is the looking out into the horizon, wanting to explore. Then you have a supernatural aid that sort of gets the story started. In Hollywood screenwriting, they call it the inciting incident, right? Meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi, or the droids dropping out of space. You have what he called the threshold guardians. That's the first challenge that the hero has to overcome, right? Maybe the
Mm-hmm.
cantina scene, or something like that from Star Wars. Then you have the threshold, the beginning of a transformation. Then you go into the second phase of the story, which is called challenges and temptations. The hero has to meet with helpers and mentors, and then he has a kind of a revelation or a death and rebirth. So his old way of life is no longer possible. Maybe his home is destroyed, and he's gone through a transformation. Then the character, we're sort of in the last part of the last quadrant here. The character has an atonement where they have to make right the mistakes that they've made along the way, and then they have to return home, and ostensibly share the wealth or the prestige that they've gained with their people, right? So that's Campbell's idea of the monomyth, the one
Mm-hmm.
story that connects all stories throughout all cultures. So
Right.
what did you think about this part of the book, which is mainly, I should say, in the foreword, right, or in the prologue, the chunk
Yeah.
the chunk of the book that people actually read generally, because the rest of it is quite dense and flowery, is the prologue, right?
Yeah, I kind of found the stages somewhat rigid. I mean, as you touched on with Star Wars, and clearly there's other stories and films and books, certainly in the 20th century, that do fit that kind of storytelling. There's no doubt about that. I guess there are elements that I very much challenge, though. I certainly believe that storytelling is fundamental to human communication. I
Hmm.
think there's some, ultimately biological reasons why stories allow us to remember things better and are very good structures for us to discern details and remember details from something that we're being communicated, no doubt. Um, but maybe even you could say that with adventurous stories, I can see that as well, and perhaps even stories about heroes. But this rigid structure, this prescribed structure that's meant to kind of be a narrative that transcends culture, geography, and race, I think for me that's probably a little far fetched. I think my kind of understanding of storytelling and the hero and things like that, backed by evolution and biology, kind of ends there for me.
Yeah, I
What
mean,
about you?
Yeah, I think the conceit of the book is a little far-fetched. And by the way, I think
Mm.
the germ of Campbell's theories can now be seen in, let's call them, much more dangerous works. And now I'm talking about things like Jordan B. Peterson's books, like
Mm.
Maps of Meaning, for example, which was his sort of pseudo historical, pseudo psychological narrative building thing, where he was, describing how humans apparently have some sort of inherent knowledge of how DNA works and all this crazy sort of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that's a bit extreme. I mean, it can't be denied that Campbell's structures became influential and therefore are familiar to
Right.
us today.
And is that influential, at least in your perspective, is that influential in a positive way and or a negative way? And was that positive or negative now, and also, let's say, many years ago, with these kind of stories that he was analyzing, these myths, perhaps biblical stories, etc. So how
Yeah.
relevant are they today? Is it a good or bad thing? How relevant were they back then? And was it a good or bad thing then?
I think that probably when my job was evangelizing new technologies, I put my faith in structures like these because they seemed to work for what I was doing.
Mm,
But I
I
think,
agree.
yeah, but I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that the exceptions tend to, over time, overwhelm the rules. To the
Mm,
point where I can definitely see that this is a useful way to write, let's say, a Hollywood screenplay.
hmm
But I'm not sure it's a useful way to look at cultures. I'm not sure
So,
it's,
so in terms of simply resonating or touching on as many people as possible, making the most amount of money, or however you want to term it,
yeah.
you think that perhaps, aligning with this structure could work in your favor.
Well, I think, yeah, and I think that actually Campbell, I think, is sort of well known that his structures and his views were um, quite conducive to capitalism, like to the
Mm.
Hollywood.
And individualism, very much,
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
painfully, like it's a very
hugely.
American dreamy.
Hugely individualist, hugely pro-capitalist, hugely pro-neoliberal. The idea that
Mm.
every struggle is between the known and the unknown for the individual, and that every individual goes on a journey and finds ultimate individual enlightenment themselves. And
Right.
and ostensibly, I mean, by implication, go back and free the peasants who don't have the knowledge that he has, right? It's very white saviory kind of uh
It is,
kind
yeah.
of story. So, and the other thing, I cheated a bit because I did read some criticisms after you and I actually initially recorded this, and as early efforts go, vanished in digital smoke. And one of the things that I came across repeatedly was the point that Campbell, throughout the book, by the way, the bulk of the book is taken up with very abstruse, very let's say hard to place quotations, long quotations from historical works. What's interesting, though, is that while the book kind of gives you a cycle of a hero's journey, it never actually gives a single example of a work that
Mm.
follows that structure. Did you notice that?
I didn't actually.
Yeah, so never in the book is it given, like, does he say, this is the story of Ulysses, or this is the story of, Helen of Troy.
So he's kind of extrapolated each stage from different stories, but not found a single story that comprises all of the stages, which is suspicious to me.
Well, it's suspicious, especially considering that what he's saying is every story should have this structure. Well,
Right,
if
exactly,
therefore
and that it's yeah,
every story should have the structure, then you should be able to quote one story, that covers every one of these bases. But it seems that not
yeah.
everyone does.
I
Um,
would think so, and that poses an interesting question for me. Is like was this is this a reflection, therefore, of his intent or is his writing simply a product of the time?
What do you mean
In a,
by his intent?
well, like, is his assessment of mythologies true? And they have these themes that are, perhaps not progressive in today's eyes, as we mentioned earlier, or was it literally a misinterpretation on his part, and there was some alternate agenda behind what he was writing?
Well, I think that there was a real, noticeable cultural chauvinism in white Anglo-American,
Right,
criticism of the 1940s and 50s. I mean,
right,
this was
absolutely.
this was a time, yeah, it was a time in which, you had people like Heinlein was writing his novels, the cultural attitudes of, constant progress, of white saviorism, of, neoliberalism, individualism. These were all super, at the forefront at those times. And not only that, but it was given sort of that these are the final forms of human consciousness, that we are individuals, that Western, and this idea lives on to this day, this idea that Western culture is the final and most complete culture, right?
Mm,
And that therefore, yeah, he's telling you, he's distilled down the truth of here is how stories should work. um,
mm,
and Campbell, throughout his lifetime, went on to sort of give some credence to that reading by preaching that this was the way stories should work, and specifically, by the way, that it should be a male story. That this is not the heroine's journey. This is the hero's journey.
mm.
Even though Campbell, by the way, taught at a women's college, so it's interesting that he he spent years teaching the hero's journey to people who he claimed were not capable of writing that story.
Oh
Um,
dear.
but also, I notice that there are not only exceptions in history. Not only does his theory sort of borrow from psychoanalysis and historicism and and spiritualism in a kind of syncretic way, but it also it's not borne out in a lot of the most popular works of today. I mean, take a look at something like, you would think that this epic story that we described should be perfectly represented in something like A Song of Ice and Fire, right? The novels
Sure.
behind a Game of Thrones.
Mm,
And they're not. They're not at all. Um, because George R. R. Martin just, dismisses the idea of a perfect, clear hero's journey archetype. The whole thing, he wants to subvert that and constantly put his characters into new situations. So
mm.
there's not necessarily fulfillment coming from one character, right? It's the whole narrative that is supposed to give you a sense of tension and resolution. So what of that? It reminds me.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting hope in many ways, because for I would say, for a very long time, Lord of the Rings. A lot of people draw comparisons, right? Lord of the Rings, which for me does kind of follow Campbell's structure and pattern, I would say.
Yeah, and some
Um,
and some would say has, troubling white supremacist DNA.
right.
There's problems. There's potential problems with,
Mm,
with the mythos behind it. Yeah, go on, go on.
yeah. Well, so it's just refreshing that, a lot of those, and, a lot of my friends who were, massive Lord of the Rings fans are also, um, fans of Martin's work as well. Um,
Which
so maybe there's a shift.
which I should say, yeah, it tells you that probably people are not missing this classic hero's journey, right? They're getting something out of these stories,
It seems like a clue.
especially in the case of George R. R. Martin. They're getting the stories of women, and not necessarily the stories of women as they relate to men, but stories of women who are heroic, women who are, passive, women who are active, women who are adventurous or not. That
Mm,
that seems to be a hallmark of it. Um, yeah, maybe it doesn't fit with Campbell's sort of very prescriptivist vision of what a story is supposed to be like.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of troubling, consequences of that period. I studied music theory at university, and one of the things that fascinated me about music history from the 1950s was the idea of serialism and expressionism or abstract expressionism in music. Uh, Composers at that time, like Morton Feldman, had the idea of distancing themselves from culture. There was an idea that the old culture of the past, the Western classical culture, was fatally damaged
Oppressive.
or
Mm.
fatally marred by Nazism and Stalinism
Sure.
and American imperialism, and
Mm.
they wanted to start something new. But what what is most interesting to me about that movement is that it does end up in a practical sense continuing to express all the same um, systemic inequalities and Western supremacism that it's rebelling against. Because just changing the means of telling a story doesn't change the system that creates a story.
Mm.
Hollywood adopted this as a system of telling a story, and what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that I think Hollywood probably adopted Campbell for a good reason, right?
Mm.
It gives them an opportunity to tell a capitalism-friendly story that they can control, a three-act structure that always, works, that
And
customers are familiar with.
it would be interesting to hear about films and stories, modern films and stories coming from alternative cultures across the globe that go very much and have been very much against Campbell's structure since 1954 or 49 and wherever it was. So, I mean, if there are any listeners that know of any, it would be super interesting to know about them.
Yeah, post them up in the comments. I mean, I'm a big fan of all kinds of film, but we're only two people, so the more experiences that others have, the better. I mean, it's interesting, you and I talking about the way that the hero's journey structure sort of embodies capitalism and neoliberalism. But we're also still very much products of that, and of that system. So it's
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm still pitching on a weekly basis, and I have to admit, I have used the hero's journey in the past. I will second think that going forward, but
well, I mean, it's like with anything when you're only presented with the benefits of something,
right.
and this is the thing with neoliberalism in our culture. When I'm talking about neoliberalism, maybe I should explain, or Will also is interested in this. The neoliberalism is the idea of freedom being somewhat individualized, not associated
Yes.
with necessarily democracy, but associated with freedom in the sense of capital being free to do what it wants to in order to succeed.
At all
Um,
costs. Yeah,
at,
that's essentially
that's
what it is.
essentially success at any cost.
Yeah.
It's the idea that the Milton Friedman idea that
Yes.
regulation is corruption, and purity and truth is found in unfettered freedom of capital to do whatever it needs to do. It's a very,
Yeah.
very
And you
West.
can see a lot of this in like Thatcherism and many political leaders across the past
Yeah, I
20,
mean,
30 years even.
Campbell was applying something of that structure to literature, but it was gaining ground in many uh, areas, not just
Mm.
in academia but also in politics. The gosh, what was I trying to say? The um, I don't know what I was trying to say, Will. Will, what was I trying to say?
Well, you got me there, dude. I don't know. I was thinking just as kind of what would be good, I think, at this point is drawing our conclusion and kind of giving potentially some advice even to people like me who were and are using the hero's journey in their story writing, their filmmaking, their pitching, or whatever it is. And I think from my side, it's that, key takeaways here. Stories are important. I think, the way our brains work essentially is based off pattern recognition. And a story essentially gives information a consistent structure, which becomes easier for our brains to kind of, sort of pass the information.
Thank you, Will. I remembered what I was going to say based on what you just said. So one of the things that neoliberalism sort of encourages us to do is to forge ahead, to find a structure that works and then implement it and scale it and grow it forever. One of the things that I've been learning, and I've been learning this recently, our discussions, your and my discussions about AI and machine learning, that there are, when there are negative externalities to a system that you're trying to scale, those externalities can end up at a system-wide basis, bringing down the all that productivity that you think is going to go up.
Right.
So in the papers I'm reading recently about machine learning's effect on productivity in the workplace, one of the things it talks about is the fact that there are a lot of negative, call them, bad behaviors that machine learning is going to cause people to do, which will cause them to waste their time, which will cause productivity to go down. So we'll be developing AI to make ourselves more profitable, more productive, but we'll actually be making ourselves less productive and more distracted.
I would love, Lloyd, to actually have a full discussion about that at some point on this podcast, if possible. I think that would be great.
Absolutely, we need to find the right book to talk about that.
Yeah,
but I think this book has the germ of that, which is, what it says is, here's the structure. Now just follow this and profit. And what we're saying is that can't be everything, right? There has to have been, people. It's interesting. It's like Slavoj Žižek says. I've told you this before. Will, it says Americans can better. What is it? Americans can better imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Right. So capitalism.
I love that.
Yeah, capitalism has only been around for like 200 years, but we now think that it's inherent, and Campbell is saying the neoliberal ethos is inherent in our very DNA. It's who we are, and I always have to remind myself, human beings. There have been 100 billion human beings in history, 110 billion human beings, and most of them, 99%, was 90% of them, never lived under capitalism, right? They lived, in different systems, in many different systems. So maybe our DNA is actually a little bit more complex than.
But would you say that capitalism has evolved from other systemic problems? I would say they have. So whilst they may not have been under capitalism, especially in Western culture, you could probably look back pretty damn far and find similar oppressive policy and systems in place.
Oh yeah, capitalism is just an extension of colonialism, which was an extension of divine right monarchy, from feudalism, right? So, you can go back and find, oppression, since people have lived in groups larger than 40 people, right? Since agriculture, but the idea that that there is a final form of humanity, and I think that's something that we have to actively reject.
I agree.
It's something that we have to say no. We are not the final form. This isn't the end of civilization. Hopefully it's the beginning.
And it needs to be part of our fundamental evolution, really.
Yeah. Well, and I've always felt that, if you actually think that you found the answer, just like, with AI, we are bleeding too much from our Will and I work together, so we're working in the kind of AI and automation space.
Ironically,
And
yes.
so, yeah, no, well, we're trying to do it in a way, that makes sense
Ethically,
to
yes.
us. Yeah, but it's not easy, and it prompts many of these types of discussions because once people think, like with large language models, that they've found, this is a classic thing in tech, and you know this too. People think they found the technology, the solution to kind of all the problems. Then, they go whole hog for that, and they tell you this is going to solve everything. Don't worry about it. And what happens every time is there are.
Well, do you remember cryptocurrency?
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah.
saying.
I do very much. I remember rejecting it and having it really derail my whole career and change, the path of my life, which is a good thing. But yeah, it was like, oh, this is gonna solve banking, right? Which is like,
I mean,
come
yeah.
on. It's ludicrous, but it's like people really buy into that because they want to
Hmm.
think that they found the last answer, and that's something maybe that is something in our DNA that says, find you once you find that answer that works, press button, get prize, then just find a way to press that button as fast as possible. But it doesn't work that
Yeah.
way, right? So LLM machine learning is not going to create artificial intelligence because it can't. It's just not the right. It's not the right approach.
Mm.
It's going to do, chatbots, which is fine, but that's all it is.
There's a use case. There are use cases, and that's kind of, I guess, what we're exploring with this company. But the idea that LLM is going to solve everything, there's going to be this singularity and and general, kind of super artificial intelligence, to me at least, doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, I think this is the where the germ of the monomyth, really infects our modern culture because, in the monomyth, if you remember, if you go back to the beginning, and our listeners can look up a picture of the hero's journey, there's always the call to adventure. The Campbell spends a lot of time talking about how the tragic character is the one who doesn't answer the call to adventure, right? The one who doesn't
Mm.
go and find the new territory, find the new supernatural aid, cross the threshold. What he's really talking about in another sense is maybe colonialism, right? War of conquest, the idea of, going out into
Huh.
the greener pasture. That's neoliberalism. That's like, there's always more growth forward, always more to be gained, on the next hill.
Mm.
And that's something that really infects our modern thinking. And one of the reasons I would posit is because it's central to our shared culture, central to film and
Which is
television.
counterintuitive when ultimately it's making an individual wealth at the expense of the collective, right?
It has to.
So,
It has to. Yeah, I
right,
mean, a person becoming wealthy and powerful. Well, not every person can become wealthy and powerful, but
exactly.
but what the hero's journey is telling you is that every person should follow their own hero's journey, and Campbell talked a lot about
Yeah,
this.
because everyone fundamentally has it deeply within them,
Yeah,
and we know that's not true, right? Like people are not, unfortunately, in the world we live in right now, at least, people don't have equal opportunity. So
not
it's
not
it's
only
kind of
do
nonsense.
not only do people not have equal opportunity, but they also don't have equal capability.
Right.
They also don't have equal desire. Um, you know,
Sure.
and maybe, who is to say what desire is most valid? The desire to conquer and to seek outside, and beyond the horizon. That's one desire, but that's a very privileged desire also, right?
Mm.
That's the desire that's born of, I don't have kids and I don't have ailing parents and I don't have responsibilities, so I can do these things. The Luke Skywalker character is somebody who's kind of superfluous, right? In a way,
Mm.
it's like a baby boomer thing. right? It's like, here's a kid who, has a job, but he gets to keep his income. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He gets to have, think about it. Actually, oh my God. I figured it out. Luke Skywalker is a boomer, right? Right? It makes sense.
Love
So
that.
he's got a job. He goes to Mos Espa to trade radio parts or whatever he does, and he's got his speeder. You know what I mean? And he's cruising for the chickies. Like he's got nothing to do. So
That's
it's that,
perfect.
yeah, it's that kind of like, here's this. Of course he's upwardly mobile slightly. He's still working class, but he's got mobility, he's got, time, he's got a little bit of cash. So, you know,
Mm.
he's a boomer, right? And that's an audience for the hero's journey, because these are people who had the privilege of no responsibilities.
Maybe we can name this episode that.
Luke Skywalker is a boomer.
Yeah. At
I
least in the description.
I figured it out. Yeah, and then think about episode 8, right? Where what does he do? The final, act of self-sacrifice from Luke Skywalker is just to go away, right?
Mm.
Just to disappear. So maybe Ryan Johnson is actually saying, boomers just go away.
Mm.
I don't know. I never thought of this before. It's interesting.
I like it.
So yeah, rebel without a cause. They're all just boomers. Hero's journey, the boomer's journey.
Yeah, written for and by and inspired by boomers.
and about boomers. Yeah, totally. I'm sold. So, how do you feel, Will, about this book?
So, I think again, there are high level aspects that I think still have some relevance today. In terms of storytelling, in terms of, you know, I think having the knowledge of hero's journey can be empowering, and there clearly can be benefits in the society we live in. I think they need to be understood and acted on, probably, ethically, and with high consideration. Um, yeah, I mean, as for the actual book, by the way, which we didn't really touch on in terms of how we found reading it, I found it pretty heavy.
It's very trying book.
It is.
I have a
I found it really tough.
I have a
Go
quote.
on.
I have a quote if people want to get a sense of how it's written. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah, go for it.
The unconscious sends all sorts of vapors, odd beings, terrors, and deluding images up into the mind, whether in dream, broad daylight, or insanity, for the human kingdom beneath the floor of the comparatively neat little dwelling that we call our consciousness goes down into unsuspected Aladdin caves. There not only jewels, but also dangerous jinn abide.
You see, the reason you can read this, Lloyd, is because you have singer's lungs. Lloyd is a very good singer, and that's why he can do this. I found, I like listening to books these days on Audible,
Yeah.
right? Because you can do stuff at the same time. And I found it was just so wordy. I found myself having to repeat like 2-minute long sentences just to get my head around it.
You can't.
You just can't.
No, I downloaded it. I also love Audible, and I'm a very audio-focused listener. I'm a very audio-focused learner, but I had to download this and highlight it and diagram it just so I could figure out what the hell.
I had to get my dusty Kindle out, unfortunately. But
yeah, and it's rough. It's a rough read. And it's very, like I said, it's very spiritualist. It's very syncretist, and I lost a lot of the respect that I had for the framework. I have to say.
Same. I found it off-putting. I found it almost elitist. I found that a lot of
very, very elitist.
Extremely. And I think that can be very off-putting for people to actually challenge it, because they feel somewhat intimidated perhaps by how wordy it was. And they'll kind of read part of the book, and because it's, pretending, let's say, to be eloquent. They just kind of assume it to be true. And I think there's a possibility he knew that. I don't know. That's speculation,
I think
but
there's
it does kind
more.
of feel like that a bit.
I think there's more than a possibility. I mean, Joseph Campbell was in a time before TED Talks was, a TED Talk kind of personality. He made a career out of selling these concepts and selling his motivational principles. He made a career out of this slogan, "Follow your bliss," which I think
Yes.
is perfectly meaningless bit of, whatever the hell that means. Follow your bliss.
I still don't know.
Well, it's great if you don't, if you don't have responsibilities and you don't have, limitations, and you can.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, there's no risk of failure. Then follow your bliss. It sounds great. There. I mean,
It's easy, right?
it was done better. It was done better by others. I mean, like, when I'm thinking of, oh, geez, what's his name? Alan Watts. Someone who actually talks
The
about.
British philosopher?
Yeah. Someone who talked, about similar things, but not, in a commodified and very, white supremacist approach, but in a more sort of circumspect manner about, yeah, you should probably try to do things that you like doing, because your life's going to be better if you do that, which I agree,
Yeah, I agree.
If you can, you should probably try to do things you like doing, but
that's the key, isn't it? If you can.
If you can, and if not, then you need to find ways, whatever ways that you can. But it's not, neoliberalism would tell us that if you don't do this, if you fail, that's because you didn't go hard enough, you didn't hustle, enough, you didn't follow enough. Your bliss was right there, man. You just didn't get it. You didn't go for it. You didn't grind hard enough.
And through my experience, I can wholeheartedly say that's a lie.
Yeah. Because how many times have you succeeded at something just to find out that it's not actually what you like?
Many times, as you know, Lloyd.
And
Let's not go there.
and same for me. I mean, so many times I found myself being good at something and liking it, and then achieving a certain level of success, and then thinking, oh, I don't like this. So what was I doing? Was I doing it wrong? Was I following my wrong bliss?
Right.
No.
And you start questioning yourself in a really bad way.
You start thinking that, because you don't have a job that pays well, that does exactly what you want to do, there's something wrong with you. It's all about you. So yeah, I think that it's I think it's not a very well written book. I think you're right. It's intentionally obtuse and intentionally flowery and intentionally dense. And I suspect that a lot of its following is similar to someone like Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, in the sense that very few readers have actually read this thing. Very few.
Well, he's notoriously similar in that he's very, I don't know whether you can say academic in the language he uses, but I think there's a lot of claims that he does that with intention.
Yeah, it's actually it's scientism, right? It's not science. This is the same thing. This is literaturism, not literature. It's
I think it might have been Dawkins actually recently who said that about Peterson in an interview I saw, perhaps. Don't quote me on that.
And when Richard Dawkins calls someone an asshole, then they really are, because Dawkins is no peach himself,
But I kind of like him though. There's something about him that I quite like personally. I haven't read his books, by the way. It's on my list. I think I've shared that with you. But from the interviews I've seen, I find him quite a character.
I don't like his voice. He's so punchable. It just seems like that person in class that everyone wanted to punch. You don't have that feeling?
I do, but he wears it so well, though. It's so unapologetic.
Yeah,
I don't know, man. I think there's something there.
It's like I got punched and I don't care, right?
Yeah, and he keeps doing it. He keeps insulting.
Yeah, he's like the guy. He was in the the guy in your school who was in the yearbook club, right? And and everyone made fun of him for being in the yearbook club. And then the yearbook came out, and he got to pick all the pictures. So who's laughing
Right.
now? Who's
Or it's
laughing?
like the bully would hurl an insult
Yeah.
at him and it corrects their grammar or something,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah. It's like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
you use the passive voice.
The past present.
and then
Exactly.
and then he picks the pictures in the yearbook, so he gets his revenge, you know.
Exactly.
And
His final revenge.
then you're
Exactly.
stuck with a stupid looking picture in the yearbook, and you know, there's nothing you can do. They've already been printed, you know. You can't hide your shame. You know, when everyone knows you have yearbooks in the UK. Did you do yearbooks?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we
Right.
did. Yeah.
So everyone knows the feeling of opening up that yearbook and paging through, and you know that every student had at least one picture in there, a candid, that they probably don't remember being taken where they're making a stupid face, right? Or in my case, probably scratching the groin area.
Pulling the trousers up, perhaps.
Pulling the trousers or picking the nose. Yeah, I was constantly in school from the age of, I don't know, about 8 to about 16, either pulling up my trousers or picking my nose,
We've all
or
been there, right?
yeah,
We've all been there.
yeah. I mean, that's what I was basically a big nose with a pair of trousers. That's what I was doing, you know. And those yearbook guys, they knew, you know.
I'd love to see a Richard Dawkins school hero's journey.
the
I would
call
love to see that.
the call to yearbook club.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
supernatural the Photoshop aid, and then, you know, yeah, crossing the threshold of, you
Yeah.
know, oh God. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. You know, I think this is how every episode might end. We'll just say, look, the book, it's fine, but it wasn't for us, or it was. You know, I'm gonna do out of 7. I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 7. I don't know why 7. I just like 7.
Okay.
I give it a 3 out of 7 because I think you can find some. I think you can quote this book and sound smart at an undergraduate party, not a graduate level party, but an undergrad party. You can sound smart if you smoke Camel cigarettes and you know,
and
and
pretend to like kind of, you know, a mid-shelf bourbon.
yeah, and you know, when someone says Nietzsche, you roll your eyes. You know, you roll your eyes. You know,
Yeah,
I drink that 69 and I smoke Camels. You know,
yeah.
that's the level of this book. It's
And you're American, but you've kind of got a strange British twang from nowhere.
yeah. So me basically when I was a junior in university. Yes, exactly.
Well, that's because you went to a UK uni, though, so you're off the hook.
I did, but I'm still very much on the hook. You know.
You've got a really good British accent, actually. You're pretty good at accents. Maybe we'll get you to recite a book at some point in some unusual accents. But hey, I mean, we're nearing the end. Do you have any kind of key takeaways or advice? Actually, that's what I was mentioned earlier. Anyone who is you know, an author or just a storyteller in the form of pitching or writing movies or anything. What's your feedback to those people about the hero's journey?
Like for me as a writer, I would say don't read don't read much about writing. You know, instead read. You know, I'll take some advice from a mentor of mine, which was, you know, read the people who you admire, not the people who you necessarily enjoy, but the people who you admire, and try to dissect and figure out what it is about them that you admire, and then try to embody it. You know, so like for me, I mean, as a writer, I actively read. You know, I go through and I highlight things that strike me that I like, and then I go back and I think about them. You know, and I don't try to read a lot of books about writing or about storytelling, because they very often fall back on these kind of cliches of there's a method,
Mm,
and I think there's a method in 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 the sense of there are methods that I teach people, that I've taught people, so that they can grasp something in, like, 2 weeks, so that they can give a public presentation. You have to do that. But if
mm,
you're really interested, then read more of what you admire and do that, and you probably, you won't go half wrong. I'm not a big fan of reading about doing the art that you do. You know what I mean? What do
mm,
you, what do
mm.
you, what do you think? What has helped you?
Um, I'm not sure really. I mean, as you know, Lloyd, I'm an engineer. I've always struggled with storytelling. Um, I think, you know, I think the key takeaway here should be that storytelling remains important. Um, and following the hero's journey, well, not the hero's journey, but incorporating an adventurous undertone or narrative, um, having a hero in your story that might be you, in the context of pitching or something like that, can be extremely powerful, and there's no two ways about it. But at the same time, I think, especially to your points, Lloyd, which actually I didn't pick up on those. Once you mentioned them to me, they really rang true. And I think there's an ethical responsibility to an extent, just to reconsider and think, actually, what am I really doing here you know, when I push for this narrative?
Yeah, and if you actually think that you found the final answer to, life, the universe, and everything, I mean, it's a cliche in today's culture, because now it's like, people go, oh yeah, we have it's gonna, VR, it's gonna be like Ready Player One, and you're like, that's a dystopia, dude. That's not supposed to. That's not. You're not supposed to want that. Uh, this is the same thing. You're not actually supposed to want the final answer, right? The final answer is not actually supposed to help you. It can't help you. You know,
And there is no final answer there, and there's no final destination either. Like,
no,
just enjoy the process,
it's
right?
right. It's right at the front. It's right at the front of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right?
Right.
Everything's really basic. Everything's really easy, and then somebody figures out the meaning of life, and then life becomes absurd. That's the story. So the story, the ending is in the beginning, which is, the universe was basic, and then someone figured it out, and then it wasn't basic anymore. And that's a good
Mm,
thing. That's a good thing. Once you figured something out, that means that I've always, yeah, I've embodied this, I would say, throughout my life, which is, once everyone agrees that something is true, it probably stops being true.
yeah.
Because for the fact that everyone believes it.
Right.
Therefore, I mean, it has a lower chance of being true, just because, things change, especially when everyone believes it. I don't know. It just strikes me as something that seems to work. So I've always gone in the opposite direction from most of the people. From most people go in one direction, I try to go in another direction. I try.
Mm.
I don't know if I succeed, but I definitely try. We should develop a signature bit at the end. Like, either I can do an impression, or I can read you like a random line from one of my iNotes that this one I wrote March 19th at 10:25 p.m. and I have no idea what it means. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
Okay, it goes: if you feed a wolf, he'll stop being hungry. If you hunt with the wolves, eventually they'll eat you.
Any ideas?
I have no idea what that means. I don't know why I wrote it.
This is in your hero's journey notes?
No, this is from
Oh,
March.
fine.
This is from March. I
Okay.
was just like, I spotted it, and I saw the headline, and I'm like, what the hell is that? And I wrote that. I don't know what it means.
Yeah, okay.
We'll have to
Maybe
figure
you
it
could
out.
do that. Maybe you could do that with an impersonation.
Okay, like
the same time.
the quote at the same time as the impersonation.
Yeah, 2 in 1.
Okay, so like I'll do walking. Okay.
Sure.
If you feed the wolf, he'll stop being hungry. He'll stop being hungry. But if you hunt with the wolves,
Yeah.
eventually they'll eat you. I don't know if that was...
I think that's one of my favorites, man.
I don't know if that was good. I can't tell.
It sounded good on my end. Let's see how that comes out.
Yeah, or I could do a quote from the book with an impression. I could work on an impression.
Exactly. Like, but the impression needs to somehow be symbolic and a summation of our impression of the book, I think.
I had this thing. I had this bit that I wanted to incorporate. We can cut this out if it doesn't work out. So the bit that I wanted to incorporate was my philosophical Matthew McConaughey. Okay. So check this out. So I figured out how to do Matthew McConaughey. Okay. So what you do is you take a common phrase and you rephrase it in a way that reverses the meaning, but it doesn't really make sense, but it kind of does.
Right.
Okay, you want an example?
I do.
Okay. So it's like if you want to go through the looking glass so you can look through the glass. Or if you want to see if the other side is greener, then you got to green the other side. You see what I mean?
I do.
Or you keep cherry picking your evidence because you don't have any evidence of cherries being picked.
Maybe we should get you doing entire episodes in different characters.
I found this book to be pretty inspiring. I won't take my shirt off.
We could just add. We could add. Starring. Insert name here and have some A-list celebrities on our podcast.
I'm gonna take my shirt off and I'm gonna read this book, Hero of 1,000 Faces. See, it gets a bit. It's like George Bush a little bit because it's the Texan thing. So I get on the George Bush thing.
Do you have to like scrunch your face, for example, when you do Bush? Like, do you have? Is there acting as well?
Yeah, it's like when I'm doing McConaughey, like I gotta look in the distance. It helps if I, get a far away look in my eyes, and a little bit of a lisp on, the Texas twang, but not too much, because I've been driving a Lincoln since Lincoln was the driver,
Yeah, and just every
if you're doing
sentence.
If you're doing George Bush, then you gotta squint, and you gotta kind of you gotta. He's a little bit uncomfortable in his skin, but he's excited to be here.
So, what part of your day or weekly routine does this feature?
I find that we live in a 2-bed flat, so I don't get as much time as I used to practice these things because I don't want to be sent away, But I sort of internalize my practice a little bit more, It's like I learned as a musician, sometimes you just got to study the notes, Sometimes you got to play the music, just in the background, if that makes sense. So you kind of process it, I think it helps to listen to other impressions, to get an idea,
Okay, well, I mean, what we can start doing is taking requests as well. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, or we can just start every book with an introduction with our celebrity guest, and then I can do a little
So
door.
he can start.
I'll do a little door sound
intro.
effect. I'll go. We have a special guest here.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me.
And then at the end, I'll ask them a question.
Yeah, they can come back in, because they were outside playing ping pong, or playing pinball. They're playing pinball.
Yeah, exactly.
Go outside and play pinball for a while.
Yeah, go make fun. Go make fun.
The trick to playing ping pong is that you gotta ping the pong. Trick to playing pinball is that you gotta put a pin in the ball. Okay, that's almost. Oh, look at that! It's almost exactly 1 hour. Perfect.
Perfect.
You know what I call? You know what I call that? I call that a job well done.
Me too, dude. That was really fun.
All right. Thank you. This was Two Bros, One Book, episode 1 in the can. Take a bow, Will.
Thank you very much.
He bowed. No one could see it, but he bowed. I'll bow as well. Matthew, go play some ping pong. All right, man. See you later. Bye. Okay. And let us know what celebrity guest you'd like to have on. Will, anything else?
We're planning on doing one every 2 weeks. We do have another one coming much sooner than that, actually.
Well, I think we'll probably release it after 2 weeks. So let's say, for the listeners, 2 weeks. So the listeners will have another episode coming out in 2 weeks, and then every 2 weeks after that. And we'll see you next time.
My homie Strick told me, dude, finish your breakfast. So that's what I'ma do. Take you back to the dude with the Lexus. Fast forward the jewels and the necklace. Let me tell you, dudes, what I do to protect us. Shoot at you actors like movie directors. Say the movie, dogs.
Now, before I finish, let me just say, I did not come here to show out. Did not come here to impress you. Because to tell you the truth, when I leave here, I'm gone. And I don't care what you think about me. But just remember, when it hits the fan, brother, whether it's next year, 10 years, 20 years from now, you'll never be able to say that these brothers lied to you, Jack.
Thing ain't lie. I done came through the block and everything that's